If you agree that heroes don't need medals to prove who they are, make sure to like and subscribe, because this story will remind you that silence can hide more courage than any parade. They thought she was just the girl who swept the chapel floors. The one who showed up before dawn, humming softly, her broom gliding across the old stone tiles while sunlight painted the pews in gold. Her name tag just said Lea, and that was all anyone cared to know. The recruits who passed through barely noticed her. The chaplain joked that she could make the place shine enough for angels to visit. And she'd smile, quiet, polite, as if she didn't mind being invisible. But people didn't ask why a woman, not even 30, moved like someone trained to skin exits, or why she jumped, ever so slightly, at the sound of helicopter blades from a nearby airstrip. To them, she was just the custodian who worked too hard and talked too little. They never saw the faint outline beneath her sleeve where a service tattoo had been carefully faded away. They never noticed how she polished the memorial plaque at the back of the chapel longer than anyone else. That plaque bore a list of names, soldiers lost in an operation no one spoke about anymore. And every morning, before the first prayer, Lee's hand would linger over one name in particular, her thumb brushing across it like she was tracing a scar. She'd whisper something, almost too quiet to hear. Asterisk, still here, Nathan. Asterisk. She never meant to come back to base life. Not after what happened overseas, after the convoy went dark in the valley, after the reports that said, losses sustained under fire, after she handed in her commission papers and disappeared into civilian life without saying goodbye. She told herself she was done with command, with responsibility, with being the person everyone turned to when the world was burning. Here, sweeping the chapel floor, she could just be Lea, not Colonel Carmichael. She could find peace in silence, penance in polish, redemption in the small, steady act of keeping something sacred clean. But peace has a strange way of testing those who crave it most. That morning was like every other. The old brass loudspeakers on the walls crackled with the morning prayer announcement, static and familiar. The air smelled of candle wax and floor polish. The young recruits who came to pray before deployment bowed their heads while Lea worked quietly behind them. She caught snippets of nervous whispers. Talk about missions, about who was leaving when. She smiled faintly. She'd been them once, too young to understand what fear really was, too proud to imagine ever breaking. She turned away, swept beneath the pews, her rhythm almost meditative. Then came the static, a harsh pop, and then the voice, deep, commanding, echoing through every corner of the chapel. Colonel Lea Carmichael. Repeat, Colonel Lea Carmichael. Return to command. Protocol Dawnlight has been initiated. The broom fell. The chapel froze. For a long, suspended moment, the sound of the wooden handle hitting the floor was louder than breath. Every head turned. The young recruits looked around, confused. Who was that? The chaplain blinked, his mouth half open, searching faces. Only one of the older veterans in the back, a man with trembling hands and too many medals on his coat, slowly rose to his feet. His eyes found hers. Recognition flared. He whispered, asterisk, no, it can't be. Asterisk. Lea stood still, her body locked between disbelief and something older. Duty, muscle memory, the echo of every command she'd ever given. Her throat was dry, her heartbeat deafening in her ears. It had been 5 years since anyone had spoken that name aloud. She thought it was buried with her old life, sealed in a dossier marked classified. But the code, Protocol Dawnlight, that was real. She'd created it herself. It was only to be activated under one condition: if the nation's defense network fell to breach. And if they were calling her now, that meant everything had gone wrong. The chapel felt smaller suddenly, its air charged, like the world outside was shifting. One of the recruits laughed nervously. That's a coincidence, right? I mean, she's just the cleaner. But the veteran in the back shook his head. Son, he rasped, voice trembling. That woman once commanded the 14th Tactical. The murmurs started, hushed, stunned, disbelieving. Asterisk, Colonel? Her? Asterisk. Lea reached down and picked up her broom, her hands steady even though her heart wasn't. She looked around the chapel. The young faces, the confused ones, the old ones that remembered. There was no hiding now. The voice from the loudspeaker repeated the call again, louder this time, almost impatient. Colonel Carmichael. Return to command. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, eyes glinting in the stained glass light, years of buried memory flooding back, the smell of gun oil and desert air, the radio static before a mission, her brother's laugh over the comms before everything went silent. She took a slow breath. "Guess they finally found me," she whispered. The chaplain stepped forward, stunned. "Ma'am, Colonel, is that true?" She gave a small, tired smile. "Was true," she said softly. "A long time ago." But even as she said it, her shoulders straightened just a little, her stance shifting, her eyes sharpening with the quiet discipline she'd tried so hard to forget. The doors of the chapel opened then, sunlight cutting through the dust, and two uniformed officers appeared in the doorway. Their faces were grim, their eyes wide with urgency. "Ma'am," one said, almost breathless, "we've been ordered to escort you to Command HQ immediately. It's active. We need you." The other recruits stepped aside instinctively. Some saluted without thinking, unsure why they did. Lee's gaze flicked to the old veteran, who nodded once, slowly, with reverence. She looked down at her broom, then at the officers. "Give me a minute," she said quietly. She set the broom gently against the pew and walked to the back of the chapel, her hand brushing the memorial plaque once more. "I told you I was done," she whispered to the name etched there. "But I guess duty doesn't listen." Then she turned, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the light. As she passed the stunned recruits, one of them stammered, "Ma'am, are you really?" She didn't stop. She just said, "Doesn't matter who I was. What matters is what needs to be done." And as the chapel doors closed behind her, the faint echo of boots on stone replaced the quiet sweep of a broom. Somewhere in the distance, the sirens began to wail. And for the first time in years, Colonel Lea Carmichael, once the youngest tactical commander of her generation, was coming back to command. The wind hit her face as she stepped outside, the chapel's peace swallowed by the sound of engines, orders, and urgency. Soldiers rushed past, phones to their ears, radios blaring coded chatter that made her blood run cold. Protocol dawnlight. She never thought she'd hear those words again. The officers led her across the courtyard toward the command building, their boots slapping in rhythm against the asphalt, and with each step, the weight of her past came crashing back. The choices, the faces, the brother she'd buried under the flag she couldn't look at anymore. Inside, screens flickered with red alerts, coordinates, cascading failure codes. A younger commander stood at the center, pale and tense. When he saw her, his disbelief was instant. "You're her," he said quietly. "They said you were gone." She didn't correct him. "Then you heard wrong," she replied, taking in the map, the breach pattern, the silent fear gripping the room. "Show me the system logs." Her voice was calm, the same tone she'd used in war zones when chaos demanded steadiness. The team scrambled to obey, and as she scanned the data, the pieces fell into place. It wasn't just a network failure, it was a coordinated strike, digital and surgical, targeting the defense grid she'd helped design years ago. Only someone who understood her protocols could dismantle them. And that realization cut deeper than any bullet ever had. Hours passed in silence and motion, the old instincts flooding back like they'd never left. She was commanding again, giving orders, reading screens, pulling plans out of muscle memory while others watched in awe. But every command carried a shadow. Her brother's face flashed in her mind when she called for a containment unit. His voice echoed when she said, "Evacuate Sector 5. Dawnlight had been their project once, before it took him. When the first confirmation came through, breach contained, systems stabilizing. The room erupted in relief. But Lea didn't cheer. She just exhaled, long and heavy, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. One of the officers whispered, "We couldn't have done this without you, ma'am." She shook her head. "You did it. I just remembered how." By nightfall, the base was calm again. The alerts faded. The hum of machines returned to normal. But Lea couldn't shake the silence pressing against her chest. She walked outside alone, back toward the chapel, every step echoing like a memory she wasn't ready to relive. The stars were sharp above the parade ground, just like that night years ago when she'd made the call that saved hundreds and cost her one life too many. She paused at the chapel doors, her reflection faint in the glass, her hair undone, her face older than her years, her eyes the same fierce blue that had once led battalions. Inside, the broom still leaned where she'd left it, waiting. She smiled faintly. You never stopped serving, she murmured to herself. You just forget why you started. And as she sat in the front pew, the stained glass flickering from the distant floodlights, Lea Carmichael realized she wasn't hiding anymore. The world had called her back, not because she wanted redemption, but because, in some strange way, it still believed she was the one who could hold it together when everything else was falling apart. By dawn, the storm had passed. The base was calm again, screens stable, sirens silent, the frantic energy of the night replaced by the hollow quiet that always follows a crisis. Soldiers moved slower now, voices lower, glancing up every so often toward the chapel, like something sacred had happened there. And maybe it had. Inside, Lea Carmichael was sweeping the same floor she had the morning before, the bristles whispering against the stone, sunlight spilling through the stained glass in a warm, forgiving glow. Her sleeves were rolled up again, her hair tied back, no rank on her chest, no orders to give, just peace, and maybe, for the first time, acceptance. The recruits who passed her didn't see a cleaner anymore. They saw the woman who'd stabilized the command grid, the one the old-timers now whispered about in reverent tones. The colonel who walked away from medals to sweep floors, and came back when the world needed her most. The chaplain found her there, the folded flag in his hands, eyes soft with awe. They're sending this to you, he said. Command wants to restore your title. Full reinstatement. Lea looked at it for a long, still moment, her gaze distant, unreadable. Then she smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds a lifetime behind it. Tell them to keep it, she said gently. The title, the ribbons, they belong to the ones still fighting. I've had enough of battles. She turned back to her broom, sweeping the last of the dust into the light. The chaplain hesitated. You saved us, Colonel. She shook her head, voice soft but steady. No, I remembered what to do, and the rest of you remembered who you were. That's all command ever really is. The old veteran from before entered the chapel then, his steps careful, but his back straighter than it had been in years. He stopped beside her, his hand resting on the pew for balance. You still got it, he said with a smile that didn't quite hide the tremor in his voice. She glanced up. Old habits, she replied. And old ghosts. He nodded. You didn't just fix a system last night. You reminded this place what it means to serve. Her eyes softened, and for a second, the weight she carried seemed to lift. Maybe that's enough, she said. To remind them. To leave something standing when you're done. Her gaze drifted toward the memorial plaque. She set the broom aside and walked to it, tracing her fingers once more over her brother's name, the same name she'd whispered every morning. You'd laugh if you saw me now, she murmured, her voice trembling. Back in the fight I swore I'd never touch again. But maybe that's what you meant when you said command isn't a rank. It's a promise. The veteran stood behind her in silence, eyes wet, hat pressed to his chest. The chapel was still, save for the faint hum of sunlight spilling across the floor. Lea straightened, her reflection faint in the polished brass plate, and for a heartbeat, it wasn't the janitor who stared back. It was the colonel again, younger, sharper, unbroken. But this time, the reflection didn't frighten her. It felt like closure. She picked up her broom, drew one last breath, and turned to face the morning. Outside, the air was crisp, the sky washed in gold, and the base, her base, was alive again. Recruits hurried to drills, mechanics shouted over engines, and somewhere, faint and fading, the loudspeakers crackled as if echoing her name one last time. As she stepped through the chapel doors, the chaplain called after her quietly, Colonel Carmichael. What now? She paused in the sunlight, her silhouette framed against the open field. Now, she said, a smile ghosting across her lips. Now I finish sweeping. Her tone carried no irony, no regret, just peace. She turned back toward the long path ahead, the broom balanced against her shoulder like an old rifle, and walked across the courtyard. Behind her, the chapel bells began to ring, and as the sound carried over the base, mingling with the morning breeze, everyone who heard it seemed to stand a little straighter, speak a little softer. They didn't know her whole story, but they knew enough. That somewhere between the silence and the sirens, a forgotten colonel had found her purpose again. And as she disappeared down the long sunlit road, Lea Carmichael, once the youngest tactical commander, now the quiet keeper of a chapel floor, knew the truth she'd been running from all along. that the measure of a soldier isn't in how long they fight, but in how they choose to serve once the fighting is done.